Um, hello. Hello. Um, my name is Tada. Welcome to a funeral. And I'm actually going to pause and light a stick of incense. Welcome to a funeral. Kind of my joking way of putting things. Um, death is an iterative process. It's not going to be over just because I did this today. So that's very real. Sorry, my chair has gotten really creaky. I'm replacing it. Yeah, I'm going to take a light breath into the belly, welcome the ancestors to protect me. I wish the ancestors and spirits that are really have my back create a shield around me that kind of reflects back what is unneeded, what is harmful to me, and just cast that out. May the people who and beings who try to inflict violence on me, that their violence will meet that mirror and be reflected back onto them as a way of rebalancing the system and for the non-dual complex good of all beings as much as it can. So I actually already recorded a version of this, but decided to record another one for whatever reason. Whoa. So what I want to start here is talk about complexity and simplicity and the grief there is in that relationship. So one of the things that I think is really hard, and it's a really present intercultural moment that I've been put through, is that as you delve deeper into more complex ways of understanding phenomena, including things like racism, sexism, and environmental collapse and all that stuff, you're moving towards more and more complex understandings. There's something that happens that where every layer that's more complex is a little bit simplifying, but generally includes the previous simpler layers. The simple layers are not thrown out, but they become a part of a more complex system. And something that is very true is that when people are really attached to very simple and intense ways of seeing the world, so you can say that as a very much a feature of ideological spaces, so simplicity and intensity in terms of understanding the world and how it works. When they encounter things that are complex or asked to hold complexity, they're just not able to. And this seems simple at first, but it really has human consequences where people who are really caught up in simple and intense perspectives of the world have a way of really reacting often. If they don't have enough familiarity with the unknown and ability to navigate, they have a real ability to, real reactive tendency to, when confronted with something that's complex, they tend to read it as opposition. Whereas, generally speaking, something that's more complex is holding more of the whole. So there's this gulf that's created, and I'm just going to be very real about it, where if you're a person that sees a lot of these matters in complex ways as complex systems, as living systems, there's a point at which you understand why people are doing what they do, but also you're seen as heretical. I guess you are, but offensive, oppositional, when really the needs and wants of others are actually included in this complexity, that even people's needs who are after the simple way, but on the other side, they won't be able to perceive that. And that has had really grave consequences for my life. And I'm gonna talk about it. And if you really want details, you can go on my blog and read my experiences of accountability abuse, and also my statement on allegations of harm from Kelly Germain / Energetic Justice. So I've been going through something, having really been embedded in ideological communities with seriously problematic cult dynamics. It's been a real road and journey over the last 3 years to be working in the community, to kind of finally releasing myself, and it's been a very rough process. What I can tell you is that yeah, it's had a tangible effect on my life. I have a lot of trouble trusting people, and at the same time, the things I've experienced cause a lot of isolation, so sometimes it leads me to make poor decision choices on who to open up to, who to let into my life, who to work with. And some of those poor choices were just part of the programming of being in an ideologically cultish community, and the consequences of that. But I think a lot of people might even have a hard time believing the things I've experienced. But yeah, overall, there's been I'll talk about it more, but there's just been a huge swath of kind of coagulating, like, false, projected, and distorted kind of allegations of my behavior in various communities. And I'm going to talk about that. And again, if you really want to see the details beyond what I'm talking about here, you can go to my blog and read my 2 statements that account with a lot of documentation. But I can tell you some of the most recent stuff. In the spring of 2021, a former collaborator, you would say, maybe former client and competitor, Kelly Germain, and her team at Energetic Justice wrote a letter about how I manipulate people in liminal states and sexually exploit them. Now, here's some actual data. One of the people who signed that letter was a former client of mine for a single session. And 6 months prior to that letter coming out, something around there, and 6 months after our first and only session, they sent me an email. And in that email, they said, we had done some light belly breathing. So not even holotropic, but very gentle, like breathing into the abdomen type exercise in our session. And the letter essentially said they felt intense sexual and romantic attraction to me when they did that. And, related to some kind of past abuse history that's possible. They weren't really specific, or even some kind of ancestral memory. And they inquired about how we continue working together, or whether there's what other work they might do. So I can read the letter word for word that I responded back. And I also just want to be really notating here that there's a way in which the client has used some kind of implicit confidentiality essentially against me, in the sense that by signing on to this letter from Kelly and Energetic Justice, but not revealing the contents and documentation of her communication, they get to avoid scrutiny. And I actually have an agreement with clients that that our relationship as a client is limited to our actual work together in a session. So otherwise, they are treated as an equal colleague, and peer. So this is a kind of I'm not going as far as saying their name, but I think it's just I have to play with it, but I don't. Yeah, it's a weaponization of our kind of trust relationship. So I'm gonna read out my response. So my response is: feels pretty good for you to check in this way, especially as it feels like you're showing up trust as a skill, per the protocol for relationship, which I'm glad you found helpful. My first sense is, sounds like it's been a tough, or at least messy thing for you to navigate. My other feeling is that you've been doing really important, honest piece of healing work. Maybe this is projection, but just my own experience has been that what you're describing here is some of the deepest work that people go through. I have myself in my own way, which is true. Following, I do think your intuition around childhood sexual abuse, or even ancestral memories of it, are on the right track. I have definitely seen there can be a pattern of people feeling pulled into relationships where there's a taboo of hierarchy, which I think is about the nervous system trying to find a stimulus that is similar to the original context of discharge energy through or reroute something. I think the complexities of that can only be really talked about at depth by getting up close, but I think you get the flavor of what I'm talking about here. In terms of how I recommend you take on this material, for one thing, I would say, I feel pretty okay about working with you again. That's something I'm open to, although maybe not this exact moment is the timing if so. It does feel like something alternate is wanting to happen. I do love somatic sex education. I have received the work myself and done the training a bit myself. I will share that I did find the work, diving into it, quite electric, while I was going into my own stuff around the same things you're exploring. For some reason, there's a feeling of maybe you would benefit from a bit of a more roundabout approach right now. I have a little hunch, and I feel like maybe you would connect with, this, person X, who is a friend, colleague I recently met. Well, we really hung out once, haha. They're trained as a counselor, somatics practitioner, and specialize in sex intimacy issues. And then I think I linked them to the website. Please feel free to let me know if you might want to check out other leads. And finally, if this is helpful to you, I did not feel similar feelings on my part during our session. Best of luck, smiley face. Tada. So that's my email back, and that is an exchange I had literally with somebody who said I sexually exploit my clients. So you probably can see the kind of hell I'm caught in. Because essentially when they get to say that, there is no due process, no due diligence. It's worse than the carceral system. And let's even talk about how Kelly Germain is somebody that has been inspired and taken a lot of my frameworks of working with white supremacy in the body, using an energetic system. Even just understanding that, white supremacy is not actually a skin color or a system of oppression as we commonly see it. It's actually an energetic phenomena which has impact beyond skin color, and also it has impact on systems. They took that and made it their business. And so by doing this, they've essentially cut off our relationship that tells a story of how they got to where they are. And being a competitor and a peer, and also Kelly hired me on to teach classes for them. I taught a class, I taught one class for one of their cohorts on this subject. And so that's a real mess. That she's a competitor and a peer and somebody who's taken my work, which is fine. But then to take these testimonies, like, for example, this client who signed on to the former client who signed on to this letter, not checking in with me about what happened, and going to some kind of huge gesture that has huge impact. It is so problematic. It's a complete, like, from my vantage point, it is defamation and it's antitrust. And it's a joke. And not only that, Resmaa Menakem was asked about me by Kelly, and Resmaa signed off on this letter as well. If you don't know Resmaa is a colleague, or so-called colleague, who we came up with the term cultural somatics to describe our work independently. And we also had a similar analyses of white supremacy in the body. So we are really close, not close as in like we talk a lot, we really didn't, but in the field, people related our work together. And he signed on to this letter without actually asking me what's going on. A letter that would have huge financial impact on me. Huge impact on me, like just relationally even. There was some weird claim that I was like Jordan Peterson and right wing or something like that. the letter itself gets very strange. But Resmaa, this is when I started a little bit distancing myself, but I think it was the spring of 2020. I had posted on Instagram because I was watching a video on Jordan Peterson, a documentary, and I made a little comment as I recorded it myself watching. It was on Instagram. Just made a little comment like, "Oh, me and Jordan Peterson are more alike than I thought initially," and he also believes the trouble is ideologies possess you. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. For a long time I avoided Jordan, so I was like, oh, he actually has some similar viewpoints, and that was interesting. And I continued to go on. I guess the major difference between us is that he really likes Diet Coke, and that to me was a comment about how his nervous system is scaffolded around caffeine. And how that relates to like the history of Western culture and its relationship to caffeine and colonialism's relation to caffeine. It was kind of like a layered contextual comment. So Resmaa commented on my Instagram and said, my soul can't handle this right now. You keep teaching or something like that. And then blocked me on Instagram. That was like a year and a half ago. Which felt to me very dramatic. And that was kind of when I started going like, oh, this is maybe not, there might be something going on here that I don't want to, I need to be a little bit careful about, if I'm really honest. And then, later this letter comes out claiming that, here, I'll pull it up. Here, what's the Jordan Peterson thing? So in the letter it said, in a recent call regarding this letter this is from Kelly's letter, so she talked to Resmaa. In a recent call regarding this letter with Resmaa Menakem, we learned directly from Mr. Menakem that he's not at all in approval of the apparent direction in which TH, that's me, is allegedly holding their practice and the way they are framing practice in their work, particularly TH's connection to and apparent fully or partial endorsements of white supremacist ideological frameworks like those of Jordan Peterson and others that TH seem to be supporting, amplifying via other social media. Resmaa Menakem has read this statement and endorses it. So yeah, the thing that Resmaa reacted to is literally just recording like a 40-second video, me watching a documentary on Jordan Peterson, and I think it's pretty clear, I would hope, that I don't propagate white supremacist ideologies and frameworks on my Instagram. I mean, I'm like laugh crying, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's here. Where is it? So yeah, essentially Resmaa kind of blocked me after that. And we still stay connected on Facebook. He blocked me, and I think my simple thing is that, like, let's be real, that a lot of these folks, and Resmaa himself calls him, says that he's an abolitionist, but the thing that Resmaa endorsed has less checks and balances than the carceral system. So that's pretty weird, right? That's pretty gross. And this is all fact. And Resmaa to this day has not actually taken the time to confront me, although I did tag him on a Facebook post that said, hey, Resmaa, it's kind of paraphrasing, but I think your behaviors are garbage here. and you should respond, something like that. And somebody untagged him from that. So that's just kind of where we're at. So that's like the most recent thing, and actually the kind of tip of the iceberg of the kind of things I've been experiencing. It's a very bad trip. Now, let me sit with that. Yeah, and yeah, this is going to be non-linear because there's no real linear way to put this all together. But another thing that's happened in relation to that, so after the letter came out, and I'm pretty rocked, right? But I met somebody again through email, and we saw each other at a gathering or something like that. That reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I see the things you're going through, and I believe in you," and they empathize with my position and what I'm going through. And we ended up having a short physical relationship. They assured me that they didn't put me on a pedestal, that it's okay for me to be imperfect and stuff. But so one of the things that happened in that is we had early on agreed that there's a certain part of their body I wouldn't touch because they had experienced some trauma around it, like a little while ago, even over their clothes. And I was like, yeah, that's totally cool. And we also had some, what I would say is pretty solid consent conversations about what are our limits, what are our likes, what safe words, how far we want to explore, like the understanding that, I might be encouraging the meeting of edges and how to respond to that. We had all this conversation. But something happened where we were doing some play wrestling while clothed, and they were on their way out the door. And apparently I had accidentally touched them where we agreed not to. I don't recall it. I don't even know. I kind of don't really know how it happened, but like, you're wrestling, things happen. I can only imagine it was for a few seconds at most, because there would have been no way that I would intentionally or at length keep doing something that I agreed not to do. So, and yeah, I mean, they were really triggered by it. And they said initially they trusted it was an accident. And it took me a while to say, okay, yeah, that did happen, and I'm sorry, because all the stuff had happened to me prior. I had to be really careful, or I felt I had to be really careful how I tell them, and how I respond in text. But I ultimately said, okay, that happened. I apologize that it happened, after getting more information about what they're saying. But a long story short is it deteriorated into a place of them threatening to contact the police if I contact them, as well as well, this is something they actually did. They reached out to Resmaa Medicum, and they don't even know Resmaa, but they reached out to Resmaa to verify I'm some kind of harmful person. It's, I really ultimately care about everybody who I've been intimate with, that way. And it's been it's super sad to feel that level of betrayal, and also um, needing to push somebody away and actually just be like, oh, I can't actually have kind or like warm feelings to this person. It's very hard for me. But this is the kind of like ghosty phenomenon. And again, I think part of the thing is like me being so isolated causes me and puts me in situations I'm not. My filtration for who I allow close to me it becomes really difficult. I'm an edgy person, I guess, and it's been hard with things like this. And like you really see that when you are people do wonder like, why is this kind of stuff keeps happening, and I do think part of it is just being very visibly public with what would be considered edgy ideas, but also operating in a community that has a lot of cult dynamics. And I'm essentially always challenging that cult dynamic and the ideological rigidity. And I think that's my fundamental issue that I'm having to clear up and saying, no, I'm not part of you. I'm not doing what you're doing. So I can go further. I can start with how this all kind of started as well. So it happens locally. I have a former housemate from about 6 years ago now, I think, maybe 5 years ago. We didn't have a good relationship. Although we definitely were enmeshed in some ways. I mean, I guess that's the definition of not good, but and I'm really not a perfect human being. And having a housemate you don't get along with isn't exactly the easiest thing to do. But in this house, I was especially in charge of, for the first little while, saying yes and saying no to who stays and who goes. Because sometimes executive decisions might need to be made based on people's behaviors. And I don't think I'd ever set up something that way again or be a lot more careful. But I was pretty vigilant at the time because in the kind of queer BIPOC activist communities I was hanging out in, there was a lot of just like house drama and stuff like that. Like, it's a very common thing. So I was very wary. And, at the time, there's a lot of immaturity on my end too. But long story short is that I asked somebody to leave the house after there's some issues, and also they went cold on rent for when it stopped responding to texts and stuff. And then subsequently a few things fell out of that. So that happened, and so while I was living with them, I also had a one-night stand with somebody, not of the house, but somebody just I met out partying. And yeah, it wasn't like a great time. Like, we're both drunk, we're both high, and neither of us really were engaging in a consent paradigm that I would engage in now. they did the things to me without checking with me that I find were highly problematic. And yeah, um, I guess I'll just like share it. So uh, they grabbed me and started making out with me, which is fine. Um, and I'm gonna say all this without any sense of malice towards this person at all. I'm just reporting what happened. So they grabbed me and kissed me, which is like, I guess, like, I think now I would be kind of like, whoa, stop. But then I was like, okay, fine. But it's something it did feel weird. But then I think they started taking my clothes off. But I mean, the point isn't that part. I was kind of like also okay with that. But there's a point at which they started to rub themselves up genital to genital without protection against me, and I was like, whoa. And I was a little bit frozen. I couldn't say anything. It was the second time that's happened in my life. But and I have to be honest, if the situation was reversed, right? Like if I took my genitals onto a woman and there was no protection, I was doing that would probably be considered like assaultive. I'm not gonna get like crazy about, like, maybe not, I don't think that's a good word, but I'm not over fixated on that for myself. I know there's some tangible differences on strength and stuff like that I can grok around, the relative safety, the difference in gender sometimes. But maybe we can argue that too. But anyways, after that, I was very I was dissociated. Now I look back. So there's something else running the program now. I'm not present in any kind of way. And again, maybe I do. Maybe I am actually upset at them. It's like I'm not upset at them, but I also am like, hey, I'm maybe taking this moment right now to that spirit. It's like, that was not cool. And also, after that, so my program is running, and there's some like very, very light, rough sex acts, like, like a hand on the neck or tug on the hair, or like, a little tapping on the cheeks that I did, that I think at the time I felt dissociated, and I was like trying to get into it. So I was trying to create excitement within me, but the real thing is I was actually frozen. And I didn't escalate it at all, but it's just kind of like what we were doing just didn't, it just kind of like, I was like, oh, we're not connecting. And like, she wasn't like saying no to what was happening, but I was like, we're not actually attuned. So I just stopped. And then we fell asleep. And the next day, at the time I was so ashamed of what happened, and I hadn't had enough understanding of what had happened. I didn't even realize or think about how they, violated me as a beginning of our sexual interaction. I hadn't even parsed that. So I felt really bad about myself, and so I over revealed this from a place of shame to my roommate, who I was friends with at the time. And I would understand now that was not cool, that I was flooding at the time and I was just over my thresholds. Totally admit that. But here's where it gets really fucked up. Is that years later, I'm in a new city, and this former roommate of mine says in some kind of Facebook group that we're both in, and I didn't know they were in it because they had me blocked, that I had sexually and physically assaulted them and somebody else. And the way it happened is through my former roommate contacted the administrator of their Facebook group and related these things. And the administrator, Richmond Lamb, the Facebook group was called The Agency. So it was for Asian, kind of cool Asian people in Montreal. Posted something that said, I heard that Tada had sexually and physically assaulted them, a person in this group, and somebody else, or something like that. So that, and my former roommate did not deny that. So I take that as them, my former roommate, literally saying the thing that Richmond said. I had to interpret it that way. And, which is crazy because I never physically or sexually done anything with my former roommate. Like, not even close. So there's some kind of lying or real falsification of memory or something happening. This is very, very scary. So this had happened, and this had a ramification of people in that community local to Montreal. There's these folks, Donna La Luna, I think they go by, and Praneet Chauhan of group. They do this podcast called Chai Chats, and they asked about an accountability process for me, and I was like, okay. And I tried to ask them, like, what is it about? Is it about my former roommate? Because if it is, I need to know. I was denied that information, saying I can't tell you. We need to protect victims. And I was like, okay. And then essentially what happened was Parneet was more cool. We just had like intimate one-on-one talk, and I just talked to her, this is what's going on with my life. And I still have issues with how Parneet handled it, but that's longer and outstanding. But Donna literally went into something like, I basically asked, like, hey, you guys are like community leaders. Can we de-escalate this conversation, as it has a lot of consequences on my life, but I can't, there's not like, there's not much I can, what am I supposed to do? And so, can we just de-escalate and use it, can I titrate a trauma-safe process? And then, like, Donna responds, we feel like we have been super generous about the way we are going about this and will continue to be. We are not the type of people to do this punitively, as is so common in call-out culture. The only reason we are doing this is because of the positions we hold in community. You either want to do this in process with us or you don't, with what accountability means to us having been laid out. We're not down for these continued emails from you trying to dictate more terms of how you like things for it to be, because to be honest, it immediately shows that your unwillingness to actually hold yourself accountable to your behaviors, and that people you've been harmed still have to be within your terms. There's a lack of reconciliation, an effort to repair, and actual understanding harmful behaviors in action. Here it comes. You do not get the same level of trust and or power in this process, and shouldn't, compared to persons who have been harmed and or from people like us who lived experience of harm, who are trying to give you space to make amends. Now, the fucked up thing here is they talking about restorative. So the background here is also that Donna and Praneet are like people in Montreal's community that host conversations about restorative justice and things. But pivotally, problematically, Donna's already determined that I've done harm. Again, which is worse than the carceral system. They're telling me I've done harm without telling me what the harm is or who's claiming it, even. So I have no way to respond. There's no checks and balances. And these are people that claim to be kind of, somewhat expert on this conversation on restorative justice, right? So, yeah, Montreal's a real fucking shit show. And, it later, and eventually Donald just refused to do any relational repair with me. Which I think is very irresponsible given what she did. The kind of harm she caused to me, I would say. By engaging me within a process where there's absolutely zero integrity and zero checks and balances. And so that was Montreal. So we can keep going. So Montreal's a shit show. So I came back to so-called Vancouver, BC. And by this time, there's whole kinds of other stuff happening because it was a local community, and these rumors are circulating because my former roommate happened to be in Montreal, and this is their modus operandi. So all these people started kind of dropping me as friends, and I came back to Vancouver, and in 2020, in early 2020, at the beginning, and I was kind of hanging out and working with somebody named Mara Kerr, who is kind of a workshop facilitator and also the organizer for Limina Gathering, which is an ancestral skills gathering I've worked with before. Now, I had been working with Mara a little bit since I knew them through friends and also hosted a workshop for them a while ago at the second gathering, and I was slated to come to the third. And I was even asked if Limina becomes a nonprofit that I might be on the board or I might serve as advisory. And one of the things that I've been providing Mara with is counsel on how to navigate things around call-out culture and accountability abuse. So even when I first started hanging out with them more in person in Vancouver, they would come to me with things around like they were in a scuffle with like an indigenous elder person, and there was some confusion around whether they had permission to do a workshop or not. And then a whole bunch of like white queer people who got involved, and I was supportive to them, and I basically named if what they were experiencing is true and their accounts are true, then sounds like there's some kind of bullying going on, was my understanding. And this could also be based on what I know now. I don't know Mara's capacity to report accurately. Let's put it to you that way. So Mara goes on. So has received this kind of support from me, and I relate to them about what's been going on with me a little bit more in detail. But very ironically, she was contacted by some people that this person, Tada, who she's planning to host at the next gathering, has done this X or has done harm, but there's no actual sharing of what that means, right? So again, it's like very vague. There's an anonymity, so she's like, I don't know who. I don't know, a bunch of weird happened, but basically, she went kind of radio silence for a few months. We had a conflict around it, you might say, because I was like, I'm being attacked here and you're not protecting me. And it felt like, for me, a kind of betrayal of a relationship prior where I had supported her. It's like non-reciprocal because I support her on very similar things, right? But she, there was a pivotal thing that she did where I didn't know about this, but she had sent out an email to all the other gathering facilitators that I had done harm and had been removed from the gathering. And that's why she did it. She said it was something else to me, but in the email she said this is why, and that she believed I had done harm. That something's going on. And she emailed about 20 people in my community have never consulted me, never learning about what the actual testimony was and the actual allegation was. All the while we were negotiating like how to handle the matter, she had already emailed people. Without any evidence, without any backing, without any clarity. Yeah. And it's unbelievable because it's somebody, you've had dinner with, you slept over at their house, and this is like what you learn about them. So by this time, is happening. It's like a huge oil spill, right? There's people that, ironically, Mara denies knowing, like somebody named Leela Brown in Portland, who has a serial pattern, from what I can understand. But she's been going around and saying me and, Dare Sohei, who's like a colleague of mine and collaborator of mine, close collaborator, have been traditionally. And although we dissolved the school that we were doing together for good reasons, and we're colleagues, and we collaborate in more like independent ways now, in a sense. But she said we're both like, I don't know, rape apologists or something, and have done harm, and she keeps going around that. And then there's a person called Golden Eventide, although their name keeps changing, but they do similar things in various Facebook groups. So there's at least 2 people that I know that go around, and actually Golden actually contacts people out of the blue. Contacts people that were my former students or maybe former clients and asks them like, "Hey, when are you going to are you going to hold Tada accountable?" That's what they go around doing. So that's the huge fucking oil spill. That is my life. And I can keep going. So the impact of this kind of thing is I was working with the Breathe Network for a long time, for about 2 years, I think, maybe more. It's an organization that does practitioner training and also support around sexual trauma. And unbeknownst to maybe many people who think I'm a crazy asshole, sexual trauma and sexual abuse is one of my number one concerns. It's because I am really interested in eroticism. It's a place that I have a lot of concern around. I have a lot of done a lot of work around, actually. So I've been providing them coaching material for the course, and yeah, had been a relatively, I think, not like super, but relatively close collaborator to the Breathe Network, whose director is Molly Broder Harris. So somebody contacted the Breathe Network and they said, "Oh, Tada, we don't." Essentially, that I can't tell you what the allegations are. We don't have any details what they are, but essentially it's like I don't know. We don't have the capacity to handle this, and we can't work with you until we figure out a restored justice thing. And that was supposed to happen in the spring of 2021, and it's now summer. I am not ascribing malicious intent to that, but I think have to be real about there's some kind of, in my view, a lack of capacity And I think they might admit to that, but from my vantage point, like, there's some really strong considerations of why organizations haven't figured out their response to these things in a time of Me Too, in an age where there's so much upheaval going on, and like knowing that humans are imperfect, so everybody's gonna have something on somebody, and how to handle those inquiries, I think, it wasn't set up. And part of the irony is I'd probably be one of the people that people come to set up these kind of things. So this is the catch-22 I'm caught in again. But if I'm really honest, and I think it's a problem when organizations that have a financial impact on the people they work with enact things based on accounts that have no checks and balances. And my stance is that is a kind of negligence and support of enabling of abuse, possibly. And I'm being very straight up. And that doesn't mean I can't have a restorative process with the Breathe Network, but I'm just putting it out there as a straightforwardly, like, I think that's a problem. And I hope they understand where I'm coming from. And you know, one of the fucked up ironies is that, like, you know, okay, well, and I'll say, like, I mean, the Breathe Network people, I think, they're not. Yeah, I mean, they have been supportive to me in some instances, so I'm not like totally writing this off either, but I'm also just being very clear about what I think is a lack of capacity, and what are people's responsibilities to develop that capacity. So other stuff that all this shit fucked up, you know, well, because there's all this community rumor stuff going on, and I always think it's a good idea to be transparent. Even like, let's say one of my first responses to the stuff coming up was to actually write up a statement on accountability and harm on my website that's not actually connected to any of the claims, as far as I understand, and from my sleuthing, but just me being a imperfect person, and my understanding of how, like, when I've had issues with consent, let's say like the case I described with like that prison with the one night stand, I'm usually not feeling safe, or I'm outside of my own alignment usually, and my capacities around saying yes or no maybe are being hindered in my responsibility understanding that. So that's kind of like an accountability statement I made. And weirdly now, probably even as this transparency that I'm having with you all might be like vibrating you and making you go into like weird, like, oh, is this a bad person? Do I believe this kind of stuff, right? It's catch-22 to me. This lose-lose, actually, I realize. So that's the real shit. Although I have receipts. So that's a thing. And I don't have receipts for everything, but, you know, there are patterns. There are definitely patterns. But yeah, like, so I've been transparent, so, and it really fucked up a few things. For example, a few years back, Tim McKee of North Atlantic Publishing reached out to me. I heard about my work, and North Atlantic is a prestigious publisher, right? Publishes Bayo Komolafe, Charles Eisenstein, Peter Levine, a lot of the canonical books in my field are published through North Atlantic. So when I get a call from them, they're excited about my work. I'm like, "Whoa, this is awesome!" And in our first chats, and I described to them what cultural somatics is and what's happening in it. They're extremely like, "Whoa, wow, this is crazy, world-changing stuff." And I was like, "Hell yeah!" And we started working on a little bit of a proposal, and nothing's set in stone. So I'm not saying that they like faltered on a contract or anything, but at the point at which my book proposal kind of went to their board stuff, they some people on the board were uncomfortable with my accountability statement. They read it or something. And I also had been transparent with them, just so you know, I know this is a weird day and age, all this stuff is happening, but I am, this is some stuff I'm going through my local community. I want you to know that because, I thought it was an informed consent thing. And also I didn't want to get too far into a project to later have to really, take things back. And, it was something I put a lot of energy in goes busto. Like I can't build on that kind of loose ground. But my transparency in effect they hadn't heard anything, but in effect my transparency shook them, as my take. And we kind of slowed that project down until they felt things were more settled. I was like, okay, that's fine. But I reached out to them in email a few months ago and then a few weeks ago now, including about stuff like that involved some of their authors there that were involved in a conference led by somebody who seemed to be quite a problematic person, and there's a question around how social capital is being used. And obviously a publisher is somebody who creates social capital, helps people create social capital. So I was just like, hey, this is happening. And inside of that, I was also saying, hey, a lot of this stuff has come out on my end. I feel a lot more clear because I had written some statements. I'd gotten more facts about what's actually happening, telling them I feel more clear if we want to work together. And I didn't receive an email back. Before, emails were coming back, and I didn't receive an email back. And then I'm still waiting on the next. So I have a lot of feelings about that. I think it's fine if they don't want to publish and work with me in the end, I guess, but I do feel things about not being wrapped up, and I feel if it is the case, it's a little bit unprofessional to leave me hanging in this way when we developed so much of my proposal was developed together. I was kind of like, well, I'm starting to move on some stuff. Do you want to talk? And yeah, it feels to me unprofessional. And maybe it can be rectified, but it feels unprofessional to me. I was also transparent with some other organizations that wanted to work with me, and I said, hey, this is what's going on. And then, understandably, they had to pull out. But, and that was like a local organization. So I'm wondering if this gives the picture of, and, and there's stuff that's even worse that I just don't have all the time in the world to share. Maybe I can say this. There's a somatics practitioner, Hannah Harris-Sutro in Montreal, who I met through originally a coaching program called Turtle Tank, and we became friends locally there. And I learned that she was spreading rumors about me in a chat because I was friends with somebody who's kind of like a former client of theirs. So it's like you can't, that's kind of malpractice, like you can't spread rumors around. Like, what about checking in with me? And it's a very weird situation. Like Hannah was spreading these rumors about me, but would come to this class where me and their former client / kind of colleague friend, and so my friend, we'd be hanging out this small Buddhist sangha and like doing exercises that include touch, and there's only 4 or 5 of us every week, and she's talking to me, chatting me up, but all the while she has been spreading this thing that I'm a harmful person. Wow. And also claims that she does cultural somatics, but not Tata's variety, but she heard of cultural somatics from me. She even read a very early copy of a book that I've never released on some of the subjects I talk about in terms of accountability, abuse, and stuff like that from like 5 years ago. Just how you navigate relationships in, activist communities is a book I was writing at the time called The Selfish Activist. But yeah, so that's the kind of shit that's been going on. Am I done here? Oh yeah, and then another person who signed Kelly's letter is like a former friend of mine. And the last time I had visited them, friend acquaintance, the last time I visited them, it's a little bit complicated. They all live in a collective house, but this person who signed the letter, Mercedes, had signed Kelly's letter, said that signed Kelly's letter accusing me of things. But behind the scenes, what had happened is I had visited their home a while ago, and I didn't have any sex with anybody there. I didn't have any makeouts or anything like that. And after I left, and a few months later, I was in contact with somebody from the house, and they said, you're asked to not come back because there's somebody here that felt manipulated by you. And I'm like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. They said, well, we can't tell you why and who. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? And I was pretty pissed off because I was like, you realize like you're making it unsafe for me to be around your local community. There's like somebody thinks something of me. I don't know what it is, and they're just triggered by me. But they're like, no, I can't tell you. But they said they mean no harm. Or they said none of us here mean no harm at the collective house. And the house is on this remote island community, so everybody's connected together, and it's called the Animal House, right? So it's a well-known, established kind of like home in like this community on a remote island called Cortez Island off BC. So this is like yeah, the impact that, and the weird thing is that Mara is also from this community. So the person in the house, Brittany, and Mara had a conversation about my behavior or whatever, but I don't know any of the fucking details. And really, my behavior when I was hanging out with them was pretty benign. The most I can think of is I talked about BDSM in the kitchen while eating and talking to one of the people of the house. That might not be it, but that's the most. And I can understand that if that is something that's like, whoa, right? But maybe you just check in first. There's some real fragility and immaturity there. It's like adults can have conversations about sex without it being like solicitation, without it being exploitation, without there's a lot of things you know what I mean? Like if the person didn't want to talk about it, you know what I mean? They could say like no, you know what I mean? Like it's just a fucking mess to me. And it's for me, yeah, I don't know. But I don't know what that is, but I think it's kitchen banter. The other person thinks it's violation of their boundaries or whatever. The only way we solve that is really to get accurate is by having a conversation. And maybe the person felt things that they didn't want to, and I mean, we can talk about that's just part of life at a certain point, and also you develop skills around navigating without demonizing people like they've done a horrible thing. I've mostly, when I was in Montreal, I was mostly hanging out with sex workers. So my entire scaffolding of what's appropriate conversation is not necessarily, at times when it's not necessarily that that reigned in, if that makes sense. Like there was different norms, right? So yeah, and then what else is there? Oh, there's a woman in Toronto called Sabrina Scott that apparently keeps collecting information about me to disseminate it, and she's somebody that knows me for sure because um, I protected a friend of mine in what was, in my opinion, a bullying campaign towards a friend of mine, and Sabrina knows me from publicly protecting somebody, and yeah, she was Sabrina was somebody who was trying to get like an article published about how my friend at the time was a bad person or something like was racist and stuff. So there's that. What else is there? I mean, there's just so much. The numerous clients that behind the scenes that like heard of stuff and or I tell them things in confidence and freak out. So yeah, my life is a fucking real shit show. I'm, it's super isolating. I don't know at any time when people will turn on me because that's just been the history. Um, and I think what it really comes down to me from really understanding what's happening, sitting back and going, this is not a bug. This has to be a feature of the actual kind of ideological communities I was walking in. And it might be a feature of the entire system. It might even just be the feature of the entire culture, right? But there's a strong aspect in the ideological communities. If you have any behavioral norms and ideas that challenge that idea, and I actually really still consider myself as somebody who really cares about racism, colonialism, sexism. I just don't care about it in the same way. Literally, in the sense of like, I had different strategies and understandings of it based on my frameworks that, frankly, I find a lot more complex than most people in the communities. And there's a lot of just like very simple, very intense ways of thinking that is pervasive in these communities. And there's some serious maladaptive behavior patterns are taken over that are baked into the actual system as an organism. So that's why I am. That's where I am. And yeah, I've been really moving through the grief of the separation. And what I'm going to say is, I'm not here to be a martyr. Or if I am, I can feel in my gut, like strong feeling. Or maybe these are fighting words. I'm here to be a martyr. And whatever you throw at me, I'm going to eat it, digest it, metabolize it, and ground it through. And as I ground it through, I hope you feel the shock of that grounding through the earth and shatters, unstabilizes. I hope there are consequences. I know there will be consequences. I seek them to bring balance to the system again. And I'm trying to relax into death of this kind of this kind of fate. Yeah, I hope it's like an earthquake. And it's felt the consequences. Yeah, I'm feeling a really real earth anger. Man, when I even say martyr, I feel a fear of being that. It's not fun. But I'm trying to die into that. I also ask for protection. I ask for consequence for the ultimate betterment of all beings in a non-dual, complex way that's mysterious. I ask for myself remuneration and prosperity for having gone through this. I ask for myself to have a way I can occupy more right side space and be able to live the creative, free life I desire to. My desire for people around me that has stuck with me to experience that also alongside, that we can have a new economy of knowledge, maybe even probably even money. I want that for the I don't know, my people. That sounds really vague, but like for my kin that have also been going through similar things as me, and ending up in a similar place. I really appreciate you all. Thank you. Let's go get it. You know, sometimes a funeral is the funeral is also the birthplace of the baby coming through, you know. And you know, like like I said, like complexity, right? On some level, I really hate these people that fucked me over. And on another level, I have basic human kind of like, I wish you well. And that wellness can be complicated. Yeah. But I think this is the complexity piece. I'm not fragmented about that. It's a part of my despise, is a part of that complex wanting well is at the same time. It's not. They both exist at the same time on different layers. And that's complexity, right? And I know that, and I'm intentional about that. It's my ethic. And fuck, one of the saddest things is that realizing that people are not capable of reciprocating that. They say they do, but it's just the same kind of in the DSM. They call it borderline splitting or whatever you want to call it. I mean, the psychological psychiatric diagnosis, like whatever, right? But people just are not. They're not actually complex. They are actually just oscillating between two simple and intense orientations, from adoration to contempt. So they're like, I really care about you and I gonna do this fucked up thing to you, but they're actually two different programs running that are not compatible at all, that they're just flipping through in a fragmented way. It's not. Complexity is different. Complexity actually becomes very simple. But I suppose that's this a philosophical conversation. But yeah, you know what I wish for? May their simplicity and intensity, that fragmentation, be grounded down into kind of complexity that is safe, that is actually nurturing, that is actually relational. May that happen. That is what we're all responsible for. To be able to be complex. Here, I'll share it, Oh, actually, no, fuck it. Actually, maybe I'll share it. Maybe should I? Alright, maybe I'll share it. Yeah, hold on a second. Something a former student said. And it's sanity, actually. They said a former student of mine had they'd gone through some tough times with me because when Kelly's letter came out, understandably, the container of the course I was teaching got really rocked, and this is something they told me months later, and in just a kind of like a private chat, and this is with their consent, but they said sometimes I don't like things you write. Like is in quotes, but it's real exploration. And I kind of like that it gives me practice examining myself and where my ghosts, insecurities, fears, etc. be at. And sitting with more complicated feelings than I like Tada, so whatever they say must be good. Or Tada said something that made me uncomfortable, so they must be bad. And we had a conversation a little bit. There was a part of me that was like, yo, dude, like this is so basic, right? Like that's so basic. When somebody does something, they might not be absolutely good, and they may not be absolutely bad. And we have to take a little bit of time to discern whatever reactions are coming from. And as if people follow my podcast, part of the answer is that sometimes I say or do stupid things, and that isn't because I'm evil. It's because I'm silly. I hope we can work towards a world where there's some of that common sense more available. But it does seem that the longer we're addicted to simple and intense ways of relating, directed by simple, intense forms of information, we're going to have a hell time of it. And I really no longer want to participate in that. And so this is a big fuck you and I love you. And a spell, protection. That will have consequences if people continue to mess around, I guess. But yeah, I'm learning a lot. Yeah, about I'm probably talking too long. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go buy some tea and buy some records. Okay, and there's a whole conversation left around the layers of. I'm gonna write it down. Tribalism versus empire, right? Because empire is one of the actual justifications of empire is that it brings peace because it unites the tribes. And then, so I think talking about tribalism and empire is really interesting polarities. And pacifism and war within that, how conflict is handled, right? And obviously, this gets into. Okay, I'm gonna record another podcast for this. Okay, so gotta go. All right, peace. Thank you.